Hi students, once again I'm meeting you to discuss a new lesson related to biodiversity and its conservation. You know that one, the living organisms are found everywhere, from peak mountains to deep seas, from rainy forests to deserts. So they have adapted to different environmental conditions. They have their own environmental conditions. Each living organism has its own environment and adapted to it. Now, what is biodiversity? In short, in one line, variability among living organisms. So, they are different in size, color, shape, behavior, etc. That variability among living organisms is called biodiversity. Now, in this lesson, we have to study about biodiversity concepts, the levels of biodiversity, magnitude and pattern of biodiversity, importance of biodiversity, biogeographical regions of India, then threats to biodiversity. What are the various factors threatening the biodiversity? Then causes of biodiversity loss, then extinction of animals and plants, and then biodiversity conservation. What are the various methods adapted to just conserve biodiversity to prevent its loss from nature? So these are the basic things you have to study in this lesson. So we have to go one by one. Biodiversity concept, the levels of biodiversity, etc. Now what is biodiversity? The definition. So it was given by UN Earth Summit in 1992. So UN Earth Summit defined biodiversity as a variability among living organisms from various sources, including the terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and also other ecological complexes in which they are a part. That's the simplest definition. Normally, this biodiversity includes diversity within species, same species, or between species and the ecosystem of a region, the interactions. So, we have diversity can be found within species or between species and ecosystem of a region. Normally, it refers to the number of organisms, or we can say it reflects the total number of organisms. It reflects the total number of organisms actually and the relative frequencies. It reflects normally total number of organisms and the relative frequencies in an ecological system and constitute the most important functional constituent of the natural ecosystem. So anyway, normally it refers to or it reflects the number of organisms and the relative frequencies, and also that is in an ecosystem or in an ecological system and constitutes the most important functional part of the natural ecosystem. That's about what is diversity and something related to diversity. We have to see the significance of biodiversity, then we have to go for other things. Now, what is the importance of biodiversity? Number one, it helps to maintain various events, ecological processes, then create soil, recycle nutrients, influence climate, degrade waste, and control diseases. This is one of the importance. Another one, it provides an index of health of an ecosystem. Now, the third one, the survival of human race normally depends on the existence and well-being of all forms of life, both animals and plants in the biosphere. That's about the importance of biodiversity. Now let's take the concept of biodiversity. Now the term biodiversity was introduced by Walter Rosen in 1986. Okay, then what is biodiversity according to his concept? Biodiversity is an assemblage of different life forms. Normally, the changes in climatic conditions are reflected in what we have the distribution and pattern of biodiversity. It is a climatic condition which will affect the biodiversity. So, anyway, the changes in the climatic conditions are reflected in the distribution and pattern of biodiversity. Suppose we are moving from what we have, that is tropics, to poles. That is poles where you have the temperature is very low. Now there is a decline in the number of species. A decline in the number of species from tropics to poles. So the number of species per unit area declines from tropics to pole. From tropics to poles. Now for example, 3 examples we have in tundra taiga, where normally the trees are less than what we have 12 species of trees, less than 12 species of trees. Those taiga and what we have there, that is tundra, found in northern Canada, northern Europe, Russia and Alaska. That is normally these are the areas which are present towards the poles, have less than 12 species of trees. If you are taking the temperate forests of United States, where we have 20 to 35 species of trees. And if you are taking also the tropical rainforest or tropical forest of Panama, this is a small area actually where you have, that is nearly 112 species. Nearly 112 species, or we can say 120 species are found in Panama, the one which is found near the tropical regions. So that is why the number of species is declining from what is called the tropics to poles. Example, we have tropical forests in Panama, the temperate forests of what we have United States, and we have the northern Canada and northern Europe, the regions of pole, where you have the taiga and we have, that is tundra forest. The number of what we have species less than 12. We less than 12, 20 to 25, and then 110 species in the case of what we have Panama. An area which is having small, that is limited one. The area is less, but having more number of trees, but found in the case of tropical regions. That's why I'm saying that when the number is declining from what is called the tropical regions to poles, while we are moving towards that area. The number of species of trees normally is decreasing from what is called tropics to poles. I given already the example of that is of poles where we have only 12 species of trees. Now in the case of temperate forests of United States, and now this forest has 20 to 35 species of trees. And if you're checking what's the tropical forest of Panama, a small area, we're having more number of species, nearly 110 species of trees. Now we have to go for the next one, the levels of biodiversity. So it was Edward Wilson popularized the term biodiversity. So the term biodiversity was popularized by Edward Wilson. The definition was given, actually the term was coined by that one Walter Rosen in 1986. Now he used to describe biodiversity at all levels of biological organization. So he described biodiversity at all levels of biological organization, from population to biomes. So from various levels, from population to biomes. So he described in terms of that one. He popularized the word means he described biodiversity, that is at all levels of biological organization, that is from population to biomes. Now if you are taking what we have the levels of biodiversity, there are 3 levels of biodiversity. One at the genetic level, that's called genetic diversity. Another one at the species level, that is called species diversity. And the third one, just actually the community or ecosystem diversity. Now we have to know one by one what is genetic diversity. So the differences in genetic makeup, the number and types of genes between distinct species. Okay, let's see now differences in genotype, or what we call genetic makeup. That's nothing but the genotype. Okay, in terms of species, the species richness and number of species in a particular area, that is called species diversity. Community or ecosystem refers to what we have different words called habitat, biotic communities and ecological process. I'll explain one by one. So there are 3 levels of biodiversity: genetic, species and community or ecosystem. Now the first one, genetic diversity. It refers to the differences in genetic makeup. That's nothing but the genotype. That's nothing but the number and types of genes between distinct species and to the genetic variation within a single species. So between distinct species and the genetic variation within a single species. It also covers the genetic variations between distinct population of the same species. It also covers the genetic variations between the populations of distinct populations of the same species. This is what's called genetic diversity. We can measure the genetic diversity by using different molecular tools that are available. For example, if you are taking India, we have nearly, that is 50,000 species variants, various types of species of paddy available. So more than 50,000 genetic variants of paddy and 1,000 genetic variants of mango available, different varieties, variants. Okay. So the variation of genes normally of species increases with the diversity in size and habitat. Variation, what is called of genes of species, variation of species of genes normally increases with diversity in size and habitat. Diversity in size and habitat normally promotes increase in number of variations in genes. Now, as a result of genetic variability, it results in the formation of different races, the varieties and subspecies. We have an example, Rauwolfia vomitaria. Rauwolfia vomitaria. There is a medicinal plant which is found in the Himalayan ranges. So, which is normally provided with what is called a medicinal substance. It has different in its what is called potency and also what we have the activity. So there are differences in potency and concentration or the presence of this what is called a medicinal ingredient, reserpine, that is due to genetic variability. So we have different species. The concentration, the potency of that ingredient reserpine different in different species. This is because of genetic variability. Now this genetic variability or diversity also helps in the development of adaptations to the changing environmental conditions. So if you are taking the significance, it results in the formation of races, varieties and subspecies. We have one example, Rauwolfia vomitaria, a medicinal plant found in the Himalayan ranges. So it shows differences in the potency and the concentration of one ingredient, what is called reserpine. I'll write it on the board later. This is because of genetic variability or genetic diversity. Genetic diversity also helps in the development of adaptations to the changing environmental conditions. That's about the importance of genetic variability or genetic diversity. Now we have to go for the next one, species diversity. I mentioned about the importance of biodiversity results in the formation of various varieties, races and subspecies. For example, I mentioned what's called Rauwolfia vomitaria, a medicinal plant growing in different ranges of Himalayas, shows differences in the potency and concentration of what is called one active ingredient, namely reserpine, due to genetic variability. So it is a medicinal plant. Okay. Now, genetic diversity helps in the development of adaptations to the changing environmental conditions. That's the importance, formation of varieties, subspecies, etc. And also in the development of adaptations to the changing environmental conditions. Now the next one, species diversity. It refers to the variety in number and the richness of species in any given habitat. The number of species per unit area at a specific time is called species richness. What is species richness? We are talking about species diversity. Species richness denotes the measure of what is called species diversity. Species richness denotes the measure of species diversity. So normally what do you mean by species richness? The species found at a given area at a specific time denotes is what is called species richness. The species richness denotes a measure of species diversity. For example, if you take the Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats, the comparison. The Western Ghats have great number of amphibian species when compared to Eastern Ghats. More number of amphibian species in Western Ghats than what is called Eastern Ghats. Now, the three indices of what is called species diversity: alpha diversity, beta diversity, and also we have gamma diversity. Suppose you are taking the number of species. The more the number of species in an area, the more is species richness. So the species richness is directly proportional to the number of actual species. The more the number of species in any given area is actually, the more is species richness. So that's why I say the species richness is directly proportional to the number of species. Okay. So there are three indices of species diversity. One, alpha diversity, then beta diversity, the third one, gamma diversity. So what is alpha diversity? It is measured by counting the number of taxa, particularly the species, within a given area or community or ecosystem. That is called alpha diversity. So it is measured by counting the number of taxa, by counting the number of species within a specific area or in a community, or we have what's called the ecosystem. That is called alpha diversity. Okay. Now the second one, beta species diversity. First one, alpha species diversity. Now it is species diversity between two adjacent ecosystems and is normally obtained by comparing the number of species unique to each of the ecosystems. Each ecosystem has its own unique number of species, unique species also. By comparing the number of species unique to each of the ecosystem, now we are measuring what is called beta diversity. Now the third one, gamma species diversity. Now it refers to the diversity of the habitats, refers to the diversity of different habitats over the total landscape, taking the, for example, southern India or northern India, like that, or even the total India or geographical area. So diversity of the habitats. One habitat is different from another habitat in species richness and species number. So that is called gamma diversity. So these are the three different types of species diversity. Now we have to go for the third one, community or ecosystem diversity. So there are three levels of biodiversity. One, we have genetic diversity. Number two, species diversity. In that only we have what is called alpha, beta and gamma diversity. Now the community or ecosystem diversity. It is a variety of habitats, the biotic communities and also the ecological processes in the biosphere. So what do you mean by community or ecosystem diversity? We have different types of habitats, variety of habitats, biotic communities and different ecological processes, like for example, food web, flow, energy, etc. Okay, and ecological processes in the biosphere. Now, it is a diversity at the ecosystem level due to diversity of niches. So it is referring to what's called diversity at the ecosystem level due to what? The diversity of niches, the trophic levels, and also various ecological processes. What are the different ecological processes coming under this category? Nutrient cycles, then the food webs, many interrelated food chain is called food web. Many interrelated food chain is called food web. Then energy flow, that's nothing with the food chain from one level to another level. And several biotic interactions, what is studied already. We have commensalism, symbiosis, mutualism, etc. These are the different types of what's called biotic interactions. All these processes are together just normally coming under community or ecosystem diversity. Okay, so that's about we have what's called the levels of biodiversity at the genetic level, at the species level, and also at the ecosystem level or community level. Now, if you're taking the example of diversity, that is ecosystem diversity, India is one of the greatest ecosystem diversity. So we have a number of actually that is habitats. For example, alpine meadows, rainforests, mangroves, coral reefs, grasslands and deserts. So we have different biomes and we have different habitats. That's why India is considered one of the greatest ecosystem diversity. So that is about one of the examples for ecosystem diversity. So with that I concluded about what we have, a few words and few things about biodiversity. We have to proceed the next one, the next class.